Even though there are more similarities than differences between JavaScript and ActionScript, there are some essential differences in the way the viewers, in this case a web browser versus the self-contained standalone viewer for the Swift files, sees the code and how it executes the code. So the compiling is slightly different. So something that we need to take into account when we're creating the hierarchy of the different movies for navigation with the way we have been coding for this specific exercise. Now, let me put a disclaimer first before anything else. The way I am coding right now, the way I'm showing you how to code this, is not the most efficient way of coding. I am being forced to split up code in different places, and that is something that I personally don't like to do. I prefer to have my code either on a AS file as a separate file or a JavaScript file as a separate file, or if I have to have it within the movie, I prefer to have it in one single frame. I prefer to control everything from one frame because it gives me a lot more control as to what the code is going to do, and I don't have to worry about going all over the place in my movie to find code. Although, like I said before, sometimes it is necessary to break up the code. But in order to continue with the workflows, a workflow that works the same way between HTML5 and ActionScript, I am going to code it the way I did for HTML5. I'm going to follow the same format for ActionScript. So with that said, what we want to do is the first thing we want to do is we want to convert our marquee canvas movie clip into an ActionScript movie clip. So to do that, let me go ahead, and the first thing we want to do is we want to go to File, Convert to, and then select what file format we want to from the drop-down menu. Now, all of these they all have different languages and different scripting formats. So we are only focusing on ActionScript and HTML5 in this class. So I'm going to choose ActionScript from here. It's going to ask me what do you want to call it, and I'll just call it the ActionScript 3, this one right here, to replace it. I'll click yes on that, and in your case, since this would be the first time that you translate it, nothing would happen. Now the output window is giving me messages and it's saying, hey, something happened. Check to see what's going on, but the document itself was translated successfully. What this is telling me is basically all of the code that I had written for HTML5 and JavaScript has been commented out. So let me go to my timeline and go to frame 30. And in frame 30, I find that all my code for JavaScript it's been commented out. Basically, it's been grayed out. But I want to keep it on there just so that you can see how similar the two languages are. So I'm going to take advantage of the whole setup, everything that I had done before, all the animations, everything's still here. As you can see, my movie clips and my frames are still there with their proper names. This should be button 1, and there it is. So everything works. Everything's basically the exact same way as it was when we created it for HTML5. So I'm going to leverage that. I'm going to go to frame 30 first, and I'm going to do the first thing I want to do is stop this movie just like we did with HTML5. So to stop the movie, I'm going to go to the bottom of the code. I'm going to hit return a couple of times, hit enter a couple of times, and I'm going to bring in a snippet. And this snippet is a timeline snippet. I want to make sure that I stop my timeline, my navigation. It's an action, sorry. So I'll go to not an action, a timeline navigation, and this is what I want. Stop at this frame. So if I double click on that, it's going to add the code for me, and it's going to say blah, blah, which is all the comments regarding what the code is, and this is the real code. As you can see, at a glance, let me remove all those comments. As you can see, when comparing that to the way it was in JavaScript, it's pretty much the same code. So the format of the scripting is the same. Now, as I said before, in HTML5, the code executes at the very beginning. So all this code is read by the browser, and then it executes based on whatever you are telling it to do. What that means for you is that even though we, in the animations and everything else, we hadn't got to mark one close button until we actually go to it, which is way further down the farther down the timeline, it still recognizes that there's a movie called close button and a movie called mark 1. However, in ActionScript, when I tell it to stop at this frame, right here, frame 30, it never got to frame 40, and that's where mark 1 exists. So as far as that code goes, and as far as the movie goes, this movie still does not exist inside the code. It doesn't exist for the code. So I need to take that into account when I'm coding, because if I tell it to look for Mark 1, it's going to tell me, I don't see any Mark 1. What are you talking about? Even though it is here. And that's because we added the movie directly onto the stage. This is why I said at the beginning of this movie in my disclaimer, this is not the way I would code. I would probably add that Mark 1 movie dynamically from the library. And we were going to see how to add movies dynamically in the next week's lecture. So we're going to be adding movies dynamically via code from the library onto the stage. So with that said, what I want to do is I want to keep that in mind, that this code is not going to see that movie clip yet. So I need to code slightly different in this instance. For now, what I want to do is I want to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to select that movie clip, the button 1, and I'm going to add a snippet to it that says click to go to frame and stop. That's what I want. And I want to go to the frame. Mark 1 frame is what that frame was called on frame 40. So I'm going to go ahead and click to go and stop. And you'll notice that it creates, let me remove the comments here. It creates code that basically says, if I click on button 1 is listening. So add a listener to button 1. What am I listening for? What is button 1 listening for? It's listening for a mouse click. When I click on the mouse, call this function. And the function is going to do what? It's going to take me to some frame and stop. So I'm going to tell it to take me to frame, Mark 1 frame. I'm going to copy that from my previous code, from my JavaScript. So I want it to go there, including the single quotation marks. And when I test this by pressing Control Enter, the movie plays and it stops where it's supposed to stop. My mouse works just fine. And when I click it, it calls that animation. But you'll notice that my movie clip keeps on looping on that frame. So I need to put a stop to that. So to do so, I need to go inside that movie clip, which is at frame 40. And there it is. That's my Mark 1 movie. Double click to enter it, and then I'll go to the end frame where the code is going to stop, the movie playback. So I'll go ahead and add the stop action to it. This time I'm just simply going to type it. And there it is, stop. So that stop, open, close parentheses, semicolon to close the sentence is what will stop my movie. So when I test this once again, Control Enter, there's the button, click on that, there's my animation, and there's my movie stopping. Now I need to code this button. In the JavaScript / HTML version of this, which is on frame 30, we call that button from frame 30 over here in the main timeline. This worked, like I said, because HTML5 and JavaScript execute they read through the code entirely for it to be able to be displayed on a browser. When it comes to standalone applications like Swift files, if I tell the playback head to stop here on frame 30, as I explained earlier, it never gets to frame 40 until I tell it to go there. So as far as the code is concerned, this movie clip on frame 40 does not exist because I haven't created a variable for it in my code at this point. It doesn't exist. So the code doesn't see it. So if I were to place a piece of code here saying, if I click on the close button inside the Mark 1 movie clip, it's going to tell me what Mark 1 movie. I don't know what that is. It does not exist because I'm still over here. So how do I work around this problem? Well, the workaround, and this is why I don't like splitting code. The workaround this problem is to actually code the button inside the movie clip, inside the Mark 1 movie clip. So I'll go to either Mark 1 and double click to enter it, or if you notice, I can always go back and use my actions window to navigate the different pieces of code. So if I click here, those are my actions on frame 30. If I click here, it takes me to the end of that animation and inside the Mark 1 movie. So I can access it either way. So I want to go ahead and add a piece of code in here. Now what this is going to do is, now that I'm here at this level, now the playback head is going to be here and it's going to see everything. At that point, this movie exists. It's inside Mark 1, so it does recognize Mark 1. So what I'm going to say is at this point, if I click on close button, that's what I want to do at this point. So I want to say, okay, well, let's select close button here. And I want it to do something. I want it to go to frame and stop on the main timeline. So let's add the code to start this action. I'm going to go ahead and double click on click to go to frame and stop. And I am going to check the code that it added. It's going to say when I click on close button here, add an event listener, the function is added to it saying if I click, call the function, and the function is saying go to frame and go to and stop frame 5. Now that is going to be looking at this timeline here. It's going to be looking at this timeline, so it's going to go look for frame 5 and stop. That's not what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do is go to number 1 in the main timeline. The frame was called main nav. That's what it was called. And I don't want it to go to and stop in this timeline. I want it to go back up to the main timeline. So in order to do that, in order to make it look up to the previous timeline, I need to write this. Movie clip, open parentheses, root, close parentheses, period. So now that says go back up to movie clip root, go and look for the movie clip root, which is the top level movie. And in that movie, go to and stop onto that frame. That's basically what I'm telling that button to do. So let me remove this comments here so that I can clean up the code a bit. This clicking on this cleans the code. It formats your code to look a little nicer. So let me go ahead and test this movie clip now and see what comes out of this. So now when I roll over, there it is. Click on that. There's my animation. And when I click on this, it closes it back and it brings me back to my navigation. So this is the way that you would create the exact same action inside a ActionScript file format. So as I said before, the formats are very similar, but there is a significant difference in the way the code is executed. On HTML5/JavaScript, or any JavaScript file for that matter inside easel.js, looks at the code entirely and it actually renders the code. It actually runs the actual code. And that's because of the nature of the output that you're going to look at. And basically you're looking at output in a website or a web page. And so because of that, the code runs through all the way, so everything is seen. What that means for you is all of the movie clips will be seen from the very beginning. Everything has been declared before you even start activating it, before you even see anything on the browser. As soon as you run it, before anything loads, the code has already been read and it has been, I don't want to call it it's been rendered because it's not rendering, but it's been recognized. Let's call it that. But in Java, in ActionScript, it's quite different. In ActionScript, basically, as you go frame by frame, if you have your code separated and you don't have movie clips that you're calling before they exist on the timeline, such as the case is here in frame 30, where we have the basically, if we were to call that close button inside this movie clip over here, it's going to say, I don't know what movie you're talking about. It doesn't exist. As far as the code is concerned, it doesn't exist, so it won't play it back. It will not respond to your click. This is something to keep in mind when you're, like I said, working on a timeline and it's all split up like this. I usually don't work this way. I usually would have all my code at the very beginning and all my variables and everything will be loaded at the very beginning of the movie. Even if you don't see them in here, I would load everything at the beginning so that everything exists from the very beginning and I don't run into these issues as I am coding. You will see how that works in our next week's lecture.